Case 1. Suspected supernatural activity in a strip club by Jacob Milkey. When I first moved to Milwaukee, I spent my days lounging about my new home, avoiding human contact. Eventually, I figured it wasn't healthy to be a shut-in at my age, and I should make an effort at pretending to be a socially adept person. That was why I found myself sitting in a dive bar, staring at a young woman sitting by herself at a table across the room. Her hair was dyed bright red, and her arms were adorned with tattoos of various religious symbols, a pride flag, several Pokemon, and a facial portrait of Linda Blair. She was stirring a martini and looked bored. Now, I've never known how to chat up people. My one and only relationship came about when both of us realized we were already dating, so it's not like I know how to make conversation. Still, one must do what one can. To this day, I am too ashamed to share my fumbling attempts to seem cool. I must have done something right, because she let me sit with her and we conversed. Her name was Moxie, which she told me was a play on her actual name, Molly. I introduced myself. It's nice to meet you, Moxie. My name's Jacob. Milky, in case you, wanted to know. I internally screamed. Both the angel and the devil on my shoulders cringed. Milky? Like the Milky Way galaxy? Got milk? Milk duds? I've been called all of those at some point, yes. Jacob Milky. Like the drink, only not spelled the same. How do you spell it? M-I-E-L-K-E. It's Italian. I tried to pull off the accent and failed. I'm about as Italian as Olive Garden. Why does that sound so familiar? Did we go to school together? She leaned forward, smiling mischievously. I didn't have a clue who she was. I think I'd remember meeting someone with such a unique sense of fashion. No, I lived in Pennsylvania my whole life. Just moved here a while ago. She grabbed my arm in a vice grip, and I let out a rather unmanly yelp. She stared hard into my eyes. They were a lovely hazel. Not that it mattered to me at the moment. Do you write scary stories? As it turned out, Moxie was a fan of my story, A Lack of Empathy, which I'd posted on a creepypasta website years earlier. We had a long discussion about my bibliography, which culminated in her agreeing to check out more of my stories, and thus began a long and fruitful friendship. I never did end up getting into her pants like I'd originally planned, but truth be told, it was just nice to have another friend in this strange new city. One day, several months after our meeting, I mentioned in passing that I wanted to try writing non-fiction work. She took it to heart, would be a polite way of putting it. Oh my God, we have to go ghost hunting or something. You could be like a supernatural detective, and you can write about your findings. People will love you. I admit the idea was intriguing. I don't think there are any horror writers who don't believe, in some small way, there's a hidden world under our own. A world that can't be explained or seen, only glimpsed. Personally, well, let's just say I've seen some things that absolutely inspired my work. For our first case, as she called it, Moxie suggested we go to a strip club she knew. I'm going to omit the name so as not to piss off the wrong people. The heavily armed people, that is. It didn't take much prompting for me to agree to go. Can't imagine why. Anyway, Moxie said that some of the dancers at the club quit after experiencing supernatural activity. The plan was to go, buy private dances from a few of the women, and question if they'd noticed anything out of the ordinary. I thought it might be easier, not to mention cheaper, to try asking them at the bar or something. But if she wanted to do it via private dances, then damn it, I was going to respect her wishes. I did some research on the club to prep for our investigation. Most of what I found was articles and opinion pieces posted online by people who have dedicated their lives to combating the evils of what consenting adults do in private. There were, however, a few that caught my eye. One article referenced an incident in which an employee disappeared. Apparently, a bouncer named John Doe, totally his real name, guys, showed up for work one night and was never seen again. The owner and dancers confirmed seeing him there, doing his job, but at some point, no one was paying attention to him anymore, and then when they went to find him later, he was gone. Another was a post on Reddit, now deleted, claiming that a dancer had gone missing on a night she was scheduled to work. They attached a photo of her as well. It's hard to tell how reliable that info is, as there were no sources to back it up, and none of the commentators knew anything useful. Eventually the night arrived. Moxie and I took the bus to the club, where she just strolled right in without the bouncer saying shit about it. She winked at me, and I stared murder at her while the bouncer took my money and ID. The club was packed. Every seat around the stages held a man, and the occasional woman with a fistful of dollars. Moxie suggested we split up to cover more ground. Her investigative technique was plopping down in one of the chairs and staring at a voluptuous woman dancing upside down on a pole. I was approached by my first dancer less than a minute after taking a seat at the bar. "Hey baby, you mind if I sit here?" She had a heavy Russian accent. I consented to her presence, and we made small talk while I waited for her to propose a dance, as per experience dictated. Did I say experience? I meant research. I'd researched strip club etiquette, not experienced it. I paid for 3 dances, and hinted that I was willing to spend more if kept happy. It was hard to get a question at first. She was really a fan of that thing exotic dancers do, and they rub their breasts on your face. Eventually, though, I asked, "So I heard that some weird things happen here, like maybe the place is haunted. Ever notice anything weird around here?" She stopped grinding on my lap abruptly, which was a sufficient answer in and of itself. "Where did you hear that?" "A friend of mine knows some people who used to work here. She said they were scared by ghosts or something." "There's no ghosts here." She hesitated, then leaned in and whispered, "But I think there might be something. Sometimes when I walk by the basement door, I can hear my babushka talking, telling me to come down. But she's been dead for years." "How do you know it's not her ghost?" "I know my babushka." She dropped her eyes and I saw goosebumps appear all over her. "I loved her and she loved me. Whatever that thing is, it does not love me. I can hear it in its voice." The remaining time in our dance was awkward. I let her wiggle, passionless and tense, on my lap, until the songs were over, and then I tipped her extra. I looked for Moxie while returning to my seat at the bar, but couldn't find her in the crowd. Maybe she'd gotten a private dance. I waited, but when 4 songs had passed, she was still nowhere to be seen. The first inklings of doubt entered my mind. Perhaps it wasn't the best idea to go looking for whatever this thing was. Another 5 songs passed, and my concern blossomed into worry. I found a man at the bar who looked like he belonged there and tapped his shoulder. "Hey buddy, have you been here before?" He turned slowly to look at me with one eye. His other was too obscured by a drooping eyelid to be of much use. When he spoke, I noticed his breath was infused with enough alcohol to sterilize a hospital. Sure am. Do you know where I can find the basement? He slurred some directions and pointed to the back of the club near the restrooms. Thank you. Welcome. I love you, man. I love you too, sir. You have a nice night. It took me a minute to actually find the basement entrance. All the other doors in the establishment were painted black, but the basement door was the same shade of red as the walls of the club. I couldn't help but feel like they were intentionally hiding it from customer view. Understandable. I made sure no one was watching and pressed my ear to the door. 3 things happened in the space of a few seconds. The first made my blood cold. You think that's a silly saying? It's not. When gripped in a state of intense fear, your brain releases epinephrine and cortisol to prepare your body to fight or flee. A side effect is a perceived rapid temperature drop. Something, was scratching the door on the other side. It was too soft to be heard over the music, unless you were as close as me. I tried to think of a reason why a person would rake their nails on the door like that, but I couldn't. No one would do that unless they were crazy, or intentionally trying to scare someone. The second thing to happen, well, I'm not sure anything did happen, materially speaking at least. What I thought was happening was some kind of energy was pouring from the door and mixing with mine. For a split second I became convinced that some kind of consciousness was touching my mind. Something not human. More than that, just as I knew it was there, it was also aware of me. And that was that. Mind made up, time to go. Except, you know that moment in a horror movie where a character does something really stupid? The third thing to happen was the scratching stopped, and the whispering began. I couldn't make out what the voice was saying, but the longer I listened, the more convinced I became that it was Mox's. Occam's razor. Some ghost or demon or mimic monster was using Mox's voice to lure me into the basement. I'd become the next person to disappear in the club. The smart thing to do was obviously walk away. And yet, Moxie was missing. Why would she leave without me? It was her idea to come here in the first place. What if she went down there while I was getting a dance? What if it wasn't too late to save her? I opened the door wide. Nothing stood before me. There was a light switch on the wall at the top of the stairs, and I used it before taking a few steps down. Light flooded the basement, and the terror that gripped me only moments ago vanished. I descended the rest of the way and looked around. The basement was a single open room supported in places with cement pillars. Boxes were everywhere, piled from floor to ceiling in some places. Moxie wasn't down here, but on the far side of the room was something that caught my attention. A hole in the wall. I crossed the room for a closer look. It was a perfect circle, like a laser beam cut through the concrete. It was about 2 feet across. While I examined it, 2 footsteps thudded at the top of the stairs. I turned and saw a man wearing the bouncer's uniform standing in the doorway. His face was grim. "Whatever you do, don't scream." He retreated through the door and shut it. Before I could take a step in its direction, the light vanished. The fear returned. There was something in the basement, and it was between me and the door. I could feel it there, feel its malice. When flight is impossible, and fighting isn't an option, the human animal has a third defense mechanism rarely used: to freeze. I didn't so much as twitch a muscle in the dark. My breath was as shallow as I could make it without passing out, and I squeezed my eyes shut. There was shuffling in front of me, and a raspy hiss that grew louder as my companion inched closer. Then it was in front of me, then all around me. The noise ceased completely and something touched me, just barely brushing the hairs on my arm. Light shone in the basement, and I saw it even through my closed eyes. There was a bang and a voice I didn't recognize. "Over here!" I opened my eyes and turned my head in the direction of the sound. A young woman wearing flashy lingerie and body glitter, a dancer from the club, stood in a doorway on the side of the basement. I hadn't even noticed it was there before. I was so fixated on the hole in the wall. The dancer waved me over urgently. "This way." I moved for the door, but a voice from behind me once again froze me in place before I could reach it. "No, stay. Stay here with me. I won't hurt you. I have things I want to show you." I raised a foot to step forward, but moving was slow, like the air had turned to tar. "Stay, Jacob. You're just like me, a child of darkness. Stay. You can accomplish so much more down here with me. Just turn around. Look at me." The woman in the doorway shook her head. "Don't do it." A small puff of cold air hit my ear, and a voice whispered mere centimeters from me. "Look at me." I bolted for the door. The woman turned and ran as well, and I heard her high heels clanging on something metal. It was a staircase. The door led outside from the basement to an alley behind the club. I rushed up the stairs but couldn't resist looking back. The basement door was swinging shut on its own. In the moments before it closed, I saw a pair of eyes looking at me from the dark. They flashed green and yellow, like cat's eyes. It was less than a second, but I looked. I saw. I didn't see the woman in the alley, nor did I see her when I went around to the front of the building. But I did see Moxie, standing near the front door. She looked surprised to see me. "Sorry, man, I got kicked out. Apparently you're not allowed to put your fingers in the girls here. I was expecting you to come out the front. Did you learn anything from that Russian chick?" I looked around. The woman couldn't have gone so far so quickly, but she was gone. "Hey, did you see one of the dancers come running out before me?" "No, just you." "Jesus, dude, are you okay? You're shaking." It took 2 days to convince Moxie I wasn't making up a story. 2 days for her to believe there was really something in the basement. Something not as physical as a person, yet not immaterial as a spirit. She wasn't very sensitive about how close I came to, well, something tells me death isn't a strong enough word to cover it. More than anything else, she was excited. In her mind, our new investigation team was in full force, and we'd just opened our first case. Though I was too terrified to realize it at the time, the bouncer who stood at the top of the stairs and the dancer who led me to safety had faces I'd seen before, in pictures on the internet, on articles and posts about missing strip club employees. The terror I'd experienced faded over time. I think the mind has a way of refusing to feel certain things in order to protect itself. I still think about that day sometimes, and I've never forgot those eyes. "Look at me." Still, life has mostly gone on as normal. Well, not normal. Over the years, Moxie and I encountered a great many things that could generously be referred to as unusual. I didn't get around to publishing our stories or the adventures of the tiny amateur group that would eventually become Milky Investigations until now. I did write about them though, keeping my musings and notes and findings in folders on my computer marked as cases. This one obviously was case 1. I do plan on sharing more of our cases. Milky Investigations is ongoing. I'm not sure why I want to share these stories, or even why I seek out the paranormal in the first place. I think it has something to do with that thing in the basement said about me being a child of darkness. I don't consider myself a bad person, but I do write about evil. Not only as fiction, but now also as my experiences with it. I record the dark things and then bring them to you. Maybe that's enough to count me among them. Or not. I'm basically talking out of my ass at this point. Thanks for listening to my experiences. There will be more cases to come. In the meantime, some advice. When you go to a strip club, try to stay with the crowd, and don't go into the basement.